Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Voice of the Vikings podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Carino, and today we have a special guest, also known as my co-host.
Hi, I am Professor Glickman here at Hudson Valley, Joel Glickman, and it's great to be here with you.
Thank you. So today we're going to be going over some very informative topics with entrepreneurship, some economics, as well as some real estate topics. And I picked Joel Glickman because I feel like he is very well informed on these topics, and also with what he does with some parts of his life definitely are a very valuable thing with these topics. So if you'd like to touch on some of that.
Sure. I guess most people would think, a math professor is one-dimensional. I'm here to teach math. I know about math, engineering, and whatnot. But behind the scenes, I do other things. And some of the other things I do, as we were talking about, I'd like to fly airplanes. I'm a pilot. But outside of that, in terms of business, I like to do things beyond just what my career is, because I feel like that's the way to get ahead.
Absolutely.
Is to not just to do one thing, but to have several irons in the fire. So I do multiple things. But before actually I taught here at Hudson Valley, I was an engineer for a small engineering company, actually right up the street over in the Rensselaer Technology Park. And this goes way back after I graduated from RPI. And then I met somebody there who I was working with, a fellow engineer, and he and I decided to start our own company. So we started an engineering company, and that was back in 1996 or something. Yeah,
Wow.
Something like that.
That's a long time.
It is a long time
Wow.
ago. And we did it for 10 years, or at least I did it for 10 years, and then ended up selling my share to him and got into other things. Started teaching here at Hudson Valley, and then I really started to get into real estate, and real estate business started to take off.
Well, that's really great. I think that's also not easy to do. I think that it takes a certain type of person to really get into those fields, because they're not just easier said than done. Once you do it, there's trial and error. So I guess my first question for you would be, what made you want to get into a field like that? And also, how did you get into a field like that?
That's a good question. Actually, it started with my business partner in the company. So my engineering business partner. So we started our company, and that was an entrepreneurial venture.
Mm-hmm.
And together we also were looking at real estate at the time as another potential entrepreneurial activity and investment at the same time. And so together we got an education. We went to some of the local real estate groups in the area.
Wow.
Who could teach you a little bit about how do you be a landlord, how to become a landlord, how do you finance a property, how do you maintain a property, all of these things before I owned a property. And from all that, we each bought a property. He bought a property in Albany, and I bought a property in Troy. And that purchase, for me, that first purchase of a 3-unit rental property in Troy, was on Congress Street in Troy, was back in 1992.
What were the prices like back then?
Well, quite different than they are now. So I purchased that property for $90,000. So for $90,000, I ended up with a 3-unit property, kind of a brownstone on Congress Street, not far from RPI. And I was living on the first floor, and I was renting the other 2 floors out. Actually, how it happened was, it was kind of interesting. I went back to RPI, I went to grad school, and I was looking for a roommate.
Oh my gosh.
And so I posted a sign, a bunch of signs at RPI, and I'm like, looking for a roommate, I'm a grad student.
Right.
And so somebody responded, and it was a female who responded, who needed a roommate, and we ended up being okay with that,
Good.
It was
That's
fine.
nice. Yeah.
We were roommates. There was no problem.
We
But
were roommates.
what I found out was that she was managing this building for another RPI alum who had moved out of the area. He moved to Maryland and handed the management of this building off to her. So she would collect the rents. She would do, kind of light maintenance. If there's anything heavy duty, she could hire somebody. And as luck would have it, she said, well, you're my roommate. This is great. You pay rent. And of course, she wasn't paying any rent because basically the payment for her services was to live for free.
Right.
I thought, this is a pretty amazing thing here, right? That she doesn't have to pay rent. And then it turns out that she ended up having to go to London, to the UK.
Wow.
So when she went to London, she said, well, I'm going to London, so how would you like the job? And I said, free rent? Yes.
Absolutely.
So
definitely.
that's how I really got started. Was I got that job handed off to me, and so now I was collecting the rents for this RPI alum, and I was going to the bank and depositing rent checks for him. I was living for free, but then I started seeing the rent checks coming, and I'm like, wait a second, this is a pretty good business here. I can see the money I'm depositing in the bank for someone else. Maybe it's time to ask this person if they want to sell their building because they live in Maryland. And that's what I did. I just called them up and say, hey, you live in Maryland. I'm maintaining the building for you. How would you like to sell it to me? Let's land on a price. And we ultimately did.
So that seems like it almost like fell into your hands with the way that real estate, it seems like it was almost meant for you in a sense.
Yeah, it sort of did in that case.
Wow.
Recounting that story, it just sort of presented itself to me. And also at the same time, with that partner in the engineering company, he had the same thoughts, about having a rental property. And so everything just aligned. And there it is. I bought that first property on Congress Street. And I can tell you that, back then I was inexperienced. I started with very little money. I think I mentioned in the talk that I gave here on campus that, I came to RPI many years back, but I came to RPI with $400 in my pocket.
Right.
That was it.
That's hard.
Literally.
It's hard to figure out what you could do with that. But you made the most out of it.
Yeah.
Fell into a good path, it seems like.
I think so. I got lucky. The thing is, in terms of success for entrepreneurs or investors, there's luck and there's opportunity. So if luck comes your way, consider that an opportunity, but it's your job to pounce on it and take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I just saw what was going on, and I said, hey, I think this would be a good business for me, and let's buy the building and see what happens. Now, I will tell you that because I was inexperienced, I went to my first real estate closing, to buy this building, and I was terrified. So I didn't understand the process at all. And then I had kind of buyer's remorse because I was thinking, did I do the right thing here? But I will tell you, as a math teacher, I did lots of spreadsheets, lots of projections and predictions, and it pretty much came out to be what I thought it was going to be in terms of how much I was going to earn each month and what the taxes were and all the expenses. It worked out.
That's good.
So some planning, I think, is important before anybody dives into anything.
Yeah.
Do your planning.
Because I was going to ask, I think you kind of touched a little bit on it. What would be your advice for people that are interested in starting an entrepreneurial path alongside with real estate? Especially someone my age that's coming into the early 20s or maybe in their 20s already, because I feel like I see a lot of young real estate agents in the market now. And, what's your advice to people that would want to be involved?
Well, I think your early 20s is the best time to do this. I think I started in my mid-20s. And what a great time to do this because, again, with just simple math, it's time value of money. The earlier you do this, the more you're earning, which then can be parlayed into another property or even earning interest. So over time, it literally grows kind of almost exponentially. So the longer you're at it, the better. If I started this career today, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today, and it takes a while to get there. So starting at your age is great. And my recommendation, probably the most important thing that somebody your age should do, maybe hasn't done it before, doesn't have the experience, it sounds scary, there's a lot of money involved, find a mentor. Find somebody to talk to who has done this before, like me, who can then basically provide you with advice from decades of experience. So I went through it. I didn't really have a great real estate mentor. I basically started on my own with a little bit of help.
Yeah, from the ground up pretty much.
And, along the way made mistakes.
Right.
So the thing is, I know what those mistakes are now. I wouldn't make them again, and I would advise someone who's getting into this field to skip those mistakes.
Yeah.
And another thing is that real estate's expensive, and it's really expensive right now.
Yeah, that's the other thing I actually did want to ask is when it comes to investing into a first property, what would be considered, I guess, cheap in the economy, and how could someone that wants to get a first property get the money to even own a property and sell it? Because you have to have the money to do that. And if you want to get into it, not everyone has that money.
Well, what I was going to say about expensive properties is that when I bought my first property for $90,000, I thought that was expensive. And then I just recently purchased a home, for my wife and I. And oh man, was that expensive. But it was the house we were looking for. And it has already, within a year and a half, has already appreciated, So I think looking at the price of real estate that can kind of scare people away from it, you got to realize that it's always going to look expensive.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you've got to understand about projecting it forward is like, okay, if it's worth, $300,000, $400,000 today, which sounds crazy and expensive, well, you know what? Give it a few years. It's going to be worth $500,000. So it's always going to seem expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to run the numbers with the market. You have to run the numbers with today's, what properties are valued at today. Run the numbers with a mortgage. Take into account maintenance. Take into account insurance. Take into account vacancies, because you have a vacancy rate that says, hey, I've got this rental property. It's not going to be rented 100% of the time.
Right.
People are going to move out, and it's going to take you a month or two to get it back up to snuff. So I think as far as acquiring your first property, my recommendation is to do kind of what I did, which is find a multi-unit property that you can live in. The benefit of that is that you live there. You can maintain it yourself, as much as you can. You have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, so you know what's happening there at all times. And you can also qualify for an FHA loan. So an FHA loan, first-time home buyer, you can actually purchase a property for 3% down.
Really?
So 3%, yes, of $300,000 is still, $9,000 or something.
Yeah.
So it's still a considerable amount of money. For me, 3% of $90,000 was $2,700. That's what I needed to do this first property.
Oh.
So it's a more expensive proposition now, but the goal is to save up that down payment, maybe have family help you out with it a little bit. But if you are going to have family help you with the down payment, one of the things the banks don't want to see typically is they don't want to see, $10,000 magically show up in your account, because what they think is, well, somebody's just gave you that money. It's not your money, and therefore you don't have skin in the game. And the bank wants you personally to have skin in the game, so that they know that if you try to walk away from that property, you're going to lose something. So I guess if you're going to get help from a family member, have them loan you some money, wait a month or two, or don't just do it the night before you're going to close, because they're going to say, where did that money show up? Because they are going to look at your finances with a fine-tooth comb. They'll look at all your accounts, like all your bank statements, everything. They want to see it all. I remember, closing these mortgages, and they're like, yeah, we need to see your bank statements, like the current one. What's going on, like within the last 30 days? Where does that money come from?
Yeah, because that looks kind of, suspicious. So my next question I have for you is back to entrepreneurship. What are common mistakes entrepreneurs make when starting a business, and how can they be avoided?
Ooh, that's a great question. As a serial entrepreneur, I've been very lucky and blessed that my entrepreneurial endeavors have worked out. In other words, I owned an engineering company for a while, and it worked out well. At the end, I did decide to leave the company, but I didn't lose my shirt. I didn't really lose any money.
That's good.
And then, of course, with the real estate, things are just taking off even right now. As we speak, things are just accelerating with that business. So I think probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I'd give to somebody who wants to branch out on their own and become an entrepreneur, which I highly recommend, obviously, is to really consider and evaluate the risk involved. Because
yes, that's so crucial, I feel like, for anything.
It is. And the thing is, and even now as I'm expanding our real estate business a little bit, I'm realizing that there is that risk-reward continuum. If you aren't comfortable with risk, you're going to put your money in a savings account. The savings account today will earn you 4%. Mm-hmm. That's not really an investment. You're just keeping up with inflation.
That's a good point. I think that's a perspective that people need to hear more. I feel like there's two different realities when it comes to the economy in a sense. So, anyways.
What's true, the thing is, people don't remember that there is this thing called inflation, and we suffered from an incredibly high inflation rate during COVID or right after COVID. And what that does to you is it devalues the dollar. So if you have money in a savings account and it's returning some interest, you might think, oh, I'm earning money. This is extra money. Well, it's not extra money if the dollar is being devalued, and that was happening. So that's the other issue. If you get, let's say you get a 5% raise. Okay, you're working for a company and they give you a 5% raise, but inflation is at 7%. Well, actually, you just took a 2% pay cut. And the thing is, people don't get that because what they do is they look at the bottom line. They're like, oh, I was earning $100,000. Well, now I'm earning $105,000. This is awesome. I can afford more. No, you can't, because the cost of goods went up 7% during COVID. So even a 5% raise was not enough to keep up with inflation. So anyway, that's for someone who's intolerant of risk. They're going to put their money in a savings account, and they will get their 4%. They will actually, in the long run, be losing value. They'll be losing money because the interest rates will always fall below the inflation rate. So you've got to do something else. And to do something else, you have to put your money at risk.
Yeah.
And how do you put your money at risk? Well, there's several ways. One is to purchase a property. Another way is to start a business and invest in inventory, invest in advertising, invest in payroll. Starting a business, that's a place to put some money or resources. You can get a business loan, of course. The Small Business Administration will help you start a business. You can do what I'm doing as well, which is I'm a hard money lender, which means I take money and lend it to other investors. So I lend it to someone who is trying to rehab a house or actually build a house. I just had a conversation with one of our customers basically earlier today where he is building a house in Utica right now. And when I visited the site, it was basically a foundation. That was it. There was nothing there but a foundation and a whole bunch of lumber that I financed, that I purchased, that the lumber was on the site but hadn't been put together. He's making progress now. He's installed the floors, they're putting the walls, they're framing. Like, he's building a house. So, but that's money at risk too, because I'm loaning that money to this person with the hopes, of course, that he's going to complete that project.
Because I think pretty much, like, from what I've been told, is that if you don't risk anything, there's not going to be a potential successful outcome.
Right, and it's stocks, it's other investments, real estate investments, it's starting your own company. You have to risk it.
Yeah.
And here's another bit of advice, and that is do what you know. Do what you know. Because I am not a good stock market investor. I've never been a good stock market investor because I put money in the market and the market goes down, and what do I want to do? First thing I do is I want to pull it out. And that's the wrong thing to do. I finally came to my senses, and I put some money in the market like in 2022, and I'm like, well, of course it's going to go down. It immediately went down.
Yeah.
Like, I bought at like a little peak, and it went down, and I'm like, see, I can't invest in the stock market. But this time I said, no, I'm just going to let it ride, let it sit there. And it has come back. But the bottom line is do what you know. Now, I did what I knew. I started an engineering company because I went to RPI, and I had an engineering partner, basically. The two of us knew how to do R&D, and we knew how to acquire contracts. So we did what we knew. Then I got into real estate as both an entrepreneurial endeavor and an investment. And now, as opposed to when I purchased my first property, I know that business really well. So I know how to evaluate properties. I know how risky things are. We just looked at a deal up in Ticonderoga, my business partner and I, for a loan. The gentleman wanted to rehab a property up there. And so we said, well, one of the criteria is that we're going to do a site visit and check out the property and check out the person doing the rehab and all that. We were able to evaluate that this is definitely not a deal for us. Because the work was substandard, and we just knew that this would not come to a successful completion. So we're savvy enough now, because we've done this such a long time, that we're able to make that evaluation. So we're minimizing risk with knowledge.
That's good. I think that's, like, so important, though. I wish, like, more people were more knowledgeable about this, because, like, it's just one of those things where it takes a person to understand this and, like, really evaluate and do the breakdown of it. And I feel like that's a really good way of wording it.
Yeah, if you're going to start a business, so this is for the entrepreneurs that are listening, you need to write a business plan, and you should understand how to write a good, solid business plan. And, people go to school for this. They go get their MBAs to learn how to basically put together a brand new business, write a business plan, a business case, a business plan, a market study. These things are like, they're not just academic. they are real things.
Yeah.
So Harbor Freight is a really large company that sells equipment and tools and things like that, mostly imported from China. So basically most of this stuff is coming from China, so it's inexpensive. But Harbor Freight just opened up a brand new store in Saratoga Springs in Wilton, maybe about 6 months ago.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. I'm like actually around that area.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've seen that.
And how did they decide to open right there in that spot? Well, trust me, they undertook a lot of research. They looked at the demographics, they looked at the population, they did a market study, and they said, we project that if we open the store here, that it will do well.
Yeah.
Because if you put the store in the wrong place,
It's
you're
not
not
going
going
to
to do
perform
well.
well.
And that has happened where stores get shut down because they didn't do their homework.
Okay, my next question for you is, how do you see the local real estate market evolving in the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I mean, I can just tell you from experience here in the Albany and Troy markets, especially Troy, since I own a lot of property in Troy, that I've just seen a slow and steady growth. This is not a market like Florida. Florida has seen explosions in value and then collapses.
Yeah.
So some of these, and same with like Las Vegas and some other areas. Here in Albany and Troy, it seems like it's been basically slow and steady.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know what the percentages are. I could sort of look up, on Zillow kind of, what some of these properties are worth now. I do know that I'm just thinking of the home that I purchased, and I'm thinking of what appreciation we got over the last year, but it's been like, I'd have to look at the numbers. But anyway, it's somewhere between maybe 6 to 10%.
Wow.
So it's slow and steady, and that's good, because if you get a spike in value, and value, by the way, or the purchase price of a home is perceived value. It is basically the value of a house is what is somebody willing to pay for it. That's the bottom line. It is actually all psychology. It's what is somebody else willing to pay for the home. That's what your house is worth, right? And that can be kind of estimated based on the area, because you can look at what are called comps. Comps are comparable properties. So you look at comps, meaning, okay, there's homes in my neighborhood that are very similar to mine. What did other people recently pay for those homes? And that gives you an idea. Because again, it comes down to real estate is based on 3 things: location, location, location.
That's what I always thought too.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that means if we were trying to sell our house on Caroline Street in Saratoga, we should be looking at comps, meaning properties that have the same number of bedrooms, relatively same square footage, same number of bathrooms near Caroline Street, because people want to live in Saratoga on Caroline Street.
They
so
do.
They will pay a premium for that. So the value has to do with location, of course condition as well, but oftentimes location can trump condition. So the property we sold was actually was my wife's family home. She was born and grew up there.
Aw.
So, yeah.
That's nice.
So it was just time. It was time to move on to a place we really wanted to be at. So, her dad had lived there. She inherited the house, and it needed some upgrades. It's an old house. It's how many years? Let's see. It's like 150-year-old house. It's an old house. It needs a lot of work. So we did some work, but we didn't do it all. And even so, because of where it was, people were interested in this house.
Yeah.
It wasn't in horrible shape, but we could have done some more to it. And I'm sure the people that are purchasing it will do more to it to modernize it a little bit. But location is so important, and that really directs value.
Yeah. That's a good point, because, I feel like just in general, location is just one of those things where that's, how you're going to pull, certain people for, certain demographics. So, agreed.
It's true, and I can tell you just a couple things. Like Troy, for example, location, location, location. We have rental properties that are in, some of them are in not the best neighborhoods. So what that does is it kind of dictates the kind of tenant we're going to get. A young urban professional will say, I don't want to live, let's say on, certain section of 8th Street or 9th or 6th Avenue where we have some of our property. So it does dictate your clientele a little bit. It also dictates the value. I know that some of our kids, their friends are now starting to buy houses. And what's been happening is, they're like 26 years old, kind of mid to late 20s, and they're finding there's just no way they can buy a house in Saratoga. So what they've been doing is a lot of them have been buying homes up there in Glens Falls, South Glens Falls, which is still kind of close to where they want to be. They're still getting a nice home, but the location is different, and so therefore the price of the house came down to something that they could afford. Yeah. So you got to really know your market, know your locations.
Know your target audience.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, your target market.
Exactly.
I guess my last question for you is, how can entrepreneurs manage their time effectively, especially when juggling multiple roles and responsibilities in a growing business?
That is a really good question, because I find myself doing just that. I find myself very busy with the multiple things that I do. And I do recommend you have multiple irons in the fire, because, when one thing isn't working, the other thing is, hopefully.
Yes.
So because of that, and because, I teach full time, I own rental property, I have tenants I have to manage, I collect rents, I manage maintenance people, and now we have a new business. Well, it's not necessarily new, but it's taking off, where we do hard money lending. So now I also have home builders who are getting in touch with me because they need to buy materials for the house they're building, because we've loaned them money or made them a promise to loan money. So it's like they'll call on draws, basically. They say, hey, we finished the floor, we need the next draw so we can buy the lumber for the rest of it. So, consider all those things that I'm doing: grading papers, teaching classes, and also, when I'm done here, I'm working with tenants, and I'm working with home builders and other people who we've loaned money to. It's a lot of work.
It is.
And the thing is, your time is valuable, and you've got to manage that time and juggle that time. But I use my calendar, and I'm I have to schedule appointments, like even coming here today, to fit that in amongst all these other things. But I think probably the most important thing to do is to make sure that you set aside some time for you, because if you don't, this will consume you.
It will.
It will consume you, and you don't want that to happen. And I'll make an admission about my first entrepreneurial endeavor, which is my engineering company, and what happened was it did consume me, and it's dangerous, because what happened at the end, when I was done with my engineering company and ended up selling to my business partner, was I burned out in a big way. It was just too much. And I actually pretty much suffered like what you might call in the old days a nervous breakdown, or
severe depression type of episode.
Yeah.
In some sense, yeah.
For me, it was anxiety. I actually suffer from an anxiety disorder, and so literally, it's a mental illness, and it's like your brain does not function 100% right sometimes. But the pressure of that company and not being able to perform, because at the end I couldn't, caused me to basically collapse. And I ended up selling my shares to my partner, and I just washed my hands of it. And I said, you know what? I physically and mentally cannot do this any longer. So the fact is that you do have to be careful with yourself. Your mental health is just as important as your physical health.
Yes.
And you don't want this to jeopardize that, because if you do and you collapse, you can't do anything. You can't, at the time I couldn't even drive. That's how bad it got.
Yeah.
So you can't drive, you can't work, you can't help people, you can't do anything. So you don't want to get that far.
No, yeah.
So I have found a better balance in my life, where I said, you know what, this was great. I had my engineering company for a while. We did pretty good. We didn't take off like a rocket ship. It wasn't Elon Musk or anything, but we basically bought ourselves a paycheck. We had a paycheck, and that was great. You know what I mean? So, but I realized, no, I need a job where I can come to work in the morning, I can do my job, and I can leave at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Where I don't have all this, because I would go home at night and have the entire weight of this company resting on my shoulders.
Wow, it's a lot of pressure. I'm sure you feel that pressure on your shoulders at that moment. So
It
Yeah.
is. It was too much. So my recommendation is that as you're doing your entrepreneurial activity, if you begin to find out that it is becoming too much, you need to throttle back. You need to
Yeah.
throttle back because you can continue to do it at a certain level, but if you try to outdo yourself, if you try to throttle up too much, if you're doing too much, then all of a sudden you may not be able to do anything.
Right.
And that literally is what happened to me. And so I learned from that experience. And so now I know to kind of keep things a little bit better organized, keep my time better
Like
organized.
moderate almost.
Not overdo it.
Yeah.
Moderate, right. We all want to grind. I think the guy from Shark Tank, he's a CEO of Fubu clothing line. Anyway, he wrote a book and everything, and like his watchword is grind. In other words, you get up in the morning, you grind, you work
Yeah.
super, super, super hard. Now, if you're capable of doing that, great. You can become a billionaire like he,
Yeah.
like he did. But you just got to know your limits.
You
bottom
do.
line.
I think from like hearing that, I really do think that mental health is just really important. No matter like what you do for work and like how many things you're doing, just, protecting your own peace, if you will, I guess. I think just being able to like reevaluate the things in your life and like being able to reflect upon yourself and things that affect you and like the elements that compile with that, I think that that's really crucial just as a human being, just understanding that complexity. So, yeah.
It's so true. And I think, anyone who has not, suffered from, mental illness, whether mild or severe, may not actually get it and may see somebody and say, oh, just cheer up. Well, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't.
Luckily, I didn't suffer from depression. I have anxiety issues sometimes, or, I had extreme anxiety. But your mental health is just as important as your physical health.
It is.
And it is health. It is not that, you can think your way out of it. Your brain's not working properly,
Yeah.
and there are solutions. So for those that are listening that do have mental health issues, go get help, because that's what I did.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here today as proof that you can get through it.
Yes. Well, thank you for answering all of my questions today. You answered them perfect. Like, just really good answers. So with that being said, thank you for being on today's episode of the Voice of the Vikings podcast. And with that being said, thank you guys for listening. Our links for our social medias will be down below. Be sure to subscribe, and if you can, give this a 5-star rating so it reaches our target audience. I'm your host, Kaylee Carino, and thank you for listening.